Hey guys, welcome back to the course. Now that we've got the Google Analytics tracking code installed on our site, we should start seeing some data rolling in eventually. Since there is no Carl and sadly there are no cream puffs, I'll show you what Google Analytics looks like with one of my projects. I'll give you a basic overview of the different sections before we dig into the concepts of goal setting and origin sorting in the next two lectures. Now, for those of you who skipped the last video, you may already be familiar with the layout of Google Analytics, and you're probably totally confused about who Carl is and why I'm talking about cream puffs. Well, don't worry about the cream puffs, and also feel free to skip this lecture, please do. Now, if you've never seen Google Analytics and their user interface before, well, brace yourself because you're gonna see a lot of stuff and it might be hard to take it all in. You might even wanna rewatch this afterwards and make sure you've got the basics down. But rest assured though, we're going to go into a lot more detail with Google Analytics later on in this course when you actually have some data about people coming into your site. So let's see what it looks like. Okay, so when we head over to analytics.google.com, again, assuming we're logged in and we have this set up, it'll look like this. Now, depending on when you guys are watching this, this user interface could look different because they change it all the time for no reason. But in general, it's the same thought process. And if they move it from one tab to another, it just takes an extra 5 seconds to find it. Now you'll see a list of all the projects where you have the Google Analytics tracking code snippet installed. If you're new to Google Analytics, you'll only see one project, like the one we did last lecture for Carl's Cream Puffs. We're gonna check out the data for my most recent project, 25 Days of Ideas. This was just a fun video project I made around Christmas, and it was like an advent calendar counting down to Christmas. For every single day, we had a video going over a way to come up with business ideas. Now you can see up here that the date range always is gonna default to the past 30 days. Then below, you can see some high level data. Yes, I'm aware that I alternate between data and data. I don't know why I do that. You'll see things like number of sessions, which is how many times the site loaded on someone's screen in the past 30 days. It counts it, if someone opens your site twice, then it's gonna count it twice. It's not about uniques. It's also gonna show you things like average session duration, which is how long people stayed on the site during each session. Bounce rate, which is a percentage of people who loaded only one page and then moved on to some other website or closed the page. One thing I'll note about bounce rate is that different analytics tools will calculate this differently. Google has a very specific way of doing it. They generally look for people that only look at one page and leave within a certain period of time. So if they go to your page and they're on there for 10 minutes, but they didn't click through to anything else, then it's not considered a bounce. Then finally, we have goal conversion rate, which is obviously at 0% because, well, I'm lazy and I never really set it up. Now, goals can be set up to track how many people, let's say, reach a certain page on your site. They can be useful for tracking things like, I don't know, how many sales you receive or how many people sign up and things like that. We're actually going to go over it in the next lecture since it's actually really, really important, especially for websites where you're selling something. Now we continue our tour and we click on all website data to get to the meat of Google Analytics. And brace yourself because it's a little overwhelming at first. Well, here goes nothing. Okay, so Google Analytics always dumps you right into the reporting tab and into the audience overview section. You can see audience and then overview in bold here. The audience section is where you go to learn more about the people visiting your site. Things like where they're located at, what languages they speak, what type of technology they use, as well as things like how often they visit your site and what they do when they actually get there. The first most obvious thing you'll see on the page is this little squiggly graph. As you can see, it's showing us the amount of sessions per day for the past 30 days. You can hover over different days to see the number for that particular day. You can see the same sessions number we saw on the last screen. Then we can see users, which is going to be a lower number because it's unique. Now that's because there are some users with multiple sessions, meaning they came to the website more than once in the past month. Especially with this website, that was kind of the point. I wanted people to keep coming back to it. After that, we see page views, which is different than sessions. This is why it's important to have that tracking code in the header of each page, because then Google Analytics will track how many pages everyone viewed across your entire website. You'll notice this number is slightly higher than the sessions number, and that's because some people viewed more than one page, assuming you have more than one page. Now this leads us right into the next number, which is pages per session, which is just the number of page views divided by the number of sessions. Pretty straightforward. Next up, we're gonna look at average session duration and bounce rate, which are the same as the numbers we saw on the opening screen. Why they're listed twice, I don't know. Then there's percentage of new sessions, meaning of the people that came to your site within a given period of time, how many of those people have never seen your site before. Now this is an estimate because Google isn't perfectly able to track this, but in general, it's decent. For example, you could visit a site, then clear your browsing history and cookies, or switch browsers, then visit the site again, and Google wouldn't know. One thing that's very specific to Google is that they track with cookies, and cookies can be cleaned. If you're ever curious what a number means in Google Analytics, here's a quick pro tip. Lots of times when you hover over things, Google actually pop up with something to tell you more about it. Like here, we see it says percentage of new sessions means, and it pops up, it says an estimate of the percentage of first-time visits. Well, there you go. So when in doubt, hover. Now that same percentage of new sessions data is displayed in the pie chart. Okay, pie. Now the pie chart is just a way of visualizing the same information. Depending on what you're trying to figure out, different visualizations can help you get there. Down below that, we can slice and dice the data different ways. Like for instance, language. You can see most of my traffic comes from English speakers, which makes sense. Next, we can check out country. Not surprisingly, the US is #1 because apparently we're great at being America. Then we can look at browser. Chrome, here you can tell is obviously in the lead, and thank God Internet Explorer is dying a slow and painful death. And then for mobile users, we can see what kind of smartphone they're using, if they're using an iPhone or an Android when they came and looked at it, and holy shit, someone actually looked at my site on a BlackBerry. Apparently my site went back in time to 2006. Now all that information can be useful for figuring out who's visiting your site and how best to serve them going forward. If you have a ton of visitors who speak Spanish, well, maybe it's a good idea to give them an option to change the language on your site. If most of your mobile traffic is coming from people on Blackberries, then you should develop your site to look good on the Blackberries. And I would love to check out your time machine. Okay, so I know that was a lot already, so I'm going to briefly go over this stuff here on the side, and then we'll go into more details in a couple of lectures from now. So each one of these icons represents a different section. You can click on them to expand and collapse them. I'm going to do a quick rundown of each of them so you can at least have a general idea of where things are. At the top, we have the dashboard. Now this is where some people first go to check on things because they can create different reports and display a bunch of them all in one spot. By default, there are a bunch of pre-populated charts and graphs like new users, what country people are in, and all sorts of other stuff. These are customizable however you want. The idea is to give you a high-level overview of things so you can see them all at once with a quick glance. Next up, we have shortcuts and intelligence events. Now, I won't bother showing you these because I don't have either one set up and it's a little hardcore for what we're trying to do. But the gist here is that you can save any custom report you create as a shortcut so you can easily find them again. I'm not even sure what intelligence events are, but by no means is it a reflection of my intelligence. Basically, both of these are more advanced features we don't need to get into right now. Now, the next one down is real time. As this name implies, this one shows what's going on your website right now. It can be fun to look at when you're getting decent traffic, although not really sure how useful this is at any given moment. Google Analytics is most useful as a tool for figuring out what happened in the past, so you can use that information to make your site and your marketing better in the future. Google Analytics in general has a delay. So a lot of times people will be on your site now and they won't put that into your data for at least 24 hours. Anyway, let's go back to the audience overview where we started to check out some of the other things in the audience section. Over here on the side, there are tons of other things, some of which are more useful than others. Many of them are just a deeper dive into the stuff on the overview page, but there's some interesting stuff in here that could be useful like demographics, geography, behavior, etc. Also, the user's flow section is interesting. It shows a visual of how different users navigated through your website. Click that drop-down menu and you can pick just about whatever parameter you can imagine and it'll show them as the first column and then show you where those users are going on your site and where they were when they left your site. Now that can potentially show you weak parts of your site where people are routinely getting to and then leaving. Maybe it's on the thank you page after they place an order, which would be great, but maybe it's the checkout page, which could be an indicator that there's some room to improve that page. Next up is the acquisition section, and this is where we'll see, yep, you guessed it, where your traffic is coming from. It'll show you how many people came through various channels like direct, social, referral, and organic search. Now this is what we're most interested in during this section of the course. We'll be digging deeper into this part in just a bit, so just stay tuned. This is also the section where you go to see what users you advertise to on Google AdWords are doing once they land on your website, although I'm not doing that at all for my website right this second. And there's another section here for all the things social, like Bookface and the big blue bloated bird. Anyway, moving on down a bit, we see on the side a section called behavior. Now this is where you go to learn more about, not surprisingly, how people behave on your site. Want to figure out what your most popular blog post is? Go here. Want to find the most popular search term people typed into the search bar on your site? Well, go here. Again, here's another cool visualization section called Behavior Flow. Now this one changes up the information a bit from the one we saw in the audience section of Google Analytics. Instead of starting with something like the country your users are in, this one starts with things like what page people started on, which is more commonly called a landing page, and then shows you how the users that started on those individual landing pages went through your site. For example, here's where you would see some different blog posts people landed on directly because they saw them on Twitter or Facebook or something like that. Well, what can people do on the blog post page? They can just close it, which is called a bounce like we talked about earlier, or they could click over to the home page to learn more about it, what your site is all about, or they could sign up for your email list, or they could click on a link in the article that leads to another article, or any other number of things. This view can help you figure out where people are going throughout your site. Now, last but not least is the conversion section, and this is where setting up goals for your site really comes into play. But like I mentioned at the very beginning, I never set up goals for the 25 days of ideas because I'm a lazy bastard and I wasn't sure what my goals would have been. But as I said then, goals can be really important for figuring out what users are doing on your website and can even help you find areas where you can improve your site. The next lecture is all about goals, how to set them up, and what you can learn after they are set up. Now, I know this lecture was a bit of a beast, especially if you're unfamiliar with Google Analytics beforehand. And we went through it really fast, but trust me, it will all eventually make sense, especially with practice. Google Analytics is definitely not meant to be pretty, since Google is basically like your nerdy cousin who still wears Velcro shoes as an adult because they're, so much more efficient. Just start poking around once you see some data coming into your site, hover over stuff and try to translate Google's nerdy explanation for things, or just, post in the Slack group where the other resident nerds are and we can try to help you out. Anyway, guys, moving on, see you in the next lecture.